plane jolted to a stop in the middle of the boarding area, and in that thick, suspended moment, every pair of eyes locked onto a scene no one could believe: the entire Horizon Atlantic flight crew being escorted off the aircraft by security, their faces drained of color. In the center of that stunned crowd, Andre Mitchell stood still, calm as the quiet eye of a storm, his phone screen still glowing, the video recording, everything spreading across the internet faster than anyone could react. 1 hour earlier, they had looked at him as someone who did not belong in first class. Now they were the ones trembling under his steady, almost icy stare. No one understood what had just happened. All they knew was that the man they had forced back to row 34, the man they dismissed as nothing more than an annoying black passenger, was in fact the one person with the power to bring the entire airline to its knees in a matter of hours. But to understand how this storm formed, we have to rewind time. The morning had begun in the luxurious stillness of Andre's glass penthouse on the 62nd floor. Texas sunlight glittered across the glass table, reflecting onto the gray Brioni suit he was adjusting one last time. In that moment, Andre carried the calm of someone long familiar with pressure. But deep inside, where a heart seasoned by hundreds of silent battles kept beating, there was always a layer of hidden caution, an invisible armor every successful black man was forced to wear. Today was not an ordinary day. It could determine the fate of Vertex Health Tech, the medical AI company he had built from a cramped storage room in Chicago into a billion-dollar empire. A $300 million investment deal with a Japanese conglomerate awaited him in San Francisco. He picked up his tablet, reviewing the presentation, slides, his lips tightening slightly, an old habit whenever he prepared for a major fight. From the smart assistant system in his home, a calm female voice spoke. "Mr. Mitchell, your car is ready." Andre nodded. In the mirror, his eyes looked sharp, deep, and weary in the way only leaders understood, the kind of exhaustion that never sat in the muscles, but in the constant need to prove one's worth again and again, even when standing at the summit. On the drive to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, Andre skimmed through emails, reassessing his strategy for convincing the Japanese partners. His mind was steady, like a compass that always knew where north was. But as the car slowed into the domestic terminal, that old wariness returned, a survival instinct sharpened since the days he was just a black kid running through streets filled with honking cars and harsh words. His father once told him, "If you want to go as far as everyone else, you have to be twice as good. If you want the respect they get, you need 3 times the patience." Andre never forgot, and this morning, even dressed in a suit worth more than many people's monthly salary, he still felt that sentence rest on his shoulders, like an invisible hand. At the first-class check-in counter, the agent, a middle-aged woman with a name tag that read, Carol, was chatting warmly with 2 white businessmen. But when Andre approached her, smile dimmed just a fraction, a brief hesitation, long enough for someone who had lived with moments like this to recognize it. "Traveling for business?" she asked, as if she needed extra proof before believing he could afford a first-class ticket. "Yes," Andre replied, his voice steady. Not annoyed, just accustomed. At security, TSA agents let 3 white passengers before him pass through with identical laptops. When Andre stepped up, they pointed at his bag. "Remove your laptop. Remove the charger as well. We need to run additional checks." Andre nodded without a word. But inside that old heaviness rose again, like a stone tied to the ankle of every black man who entered a space of power without his name written on the door. In the first-class lounge, the receptionist smiled professionally, then paused ever so slightly when she saw him. "May I see your identification?" Andre held back a breath, then handed it over. The white man before him had only shown his boarding pass. Another familiar cycle. A story repeated so often, it was no longer a mistake, but a structural nail holding an entire system together. Andre chose a quiet spot near the stairs, opened his laptop, and buried himself in work, trying to drown out the sting of being scrutinized again. But deep in his mind, something tightened, a faint sense of foreboding, like metal grinding before a storm. When the announcement invited first-class passengers to board, Andre rose, tall and confident. His name shone clearly on the screen. Mitchell Andre, Seat 1A. Everything appeared normal, at least on the surface. The scanner beeped. The green light flicked on. Andre stepped onto the jet bridge, his heartbeat steady, his thoughts occupied with medical data, AI algorithms, and the opening lines of his presentation. He had no idea that within minutes, everything he had fought for to be treated as a deserving human being would be twisted and trampled in front of hundreds of strangers. A humiliation, a sudden collapse, a moment so small, yet powerful enough to unleash a historic storm, because on that plane, someone believed power lived in a uniform, in a crew badge, in the skin color of the person they wanted to believe was lesser. They had no idea the man they were about to demean held the ability to crack their entire sky open with a single tap on a phone screen. And the storm had already begun to form from a single moment of misjudgment, from a familiar prejudice, from the instant they decided he did not belong in Seat 1A. They did not know 1A belonged to him, and so did justice. Andre stepped into first class with the confidence of a man long accustomed to standing in rooms where decisions worth hundreds of millions of dollars were signed. The scent of new leather, the soft lighting, and the gentle background music created a luxurious atmosphere designed to separate important passengers from the rest of the plane. He placed his leather briefcase in the overhead bin above Seat 1A, adjusted his collar, and opened his tablet to review his slides. Everything was unfolding exactly as he had planned for that perfectly orchestrated morning. But only 2 minutes later, a large shadow fell across his tablet screen, blocking the light. Andre looked up. A white man in his 50s face, flushed with anger and breath-sharp with irritation, glared at him as if he had caught an intruder trespassing on sacred ground. "You're in my seat." No greeting, no verification, no attempt to check the situation. Just pure, unquestioning arrogance. Andre remained calm and showed his boarding pass on his phone. 1A is mine. The man extended his own phone, which also displayed 1A. 2 boarding passes, 1 seat. But instead of checking the system, the man simply folded his arms and stood there, waiting as if Andre should already know his place and vacate the seat. The silence tightened like a drawn string, and then a flight attendant named Lindsay appeared. The moment she saw the man, her expression softened, warm and accommodating. When her eyes shifted to Andre, they turned cold and suspicious. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked, but her gaze stayed focused on the man, as if he were the one whose comfort mattered. The man began complaining, his tone dripping with indignation, as if the idea of a black man sitting in his seat was unacceptable. Andre held up his boarding pass. Lindsay glanced at it for barely a second, her eyes not even stopping long enough to register it. before turning back to the man with a noticeably gentler tone. "I'll check your seat, sir." The way she dismissed Andre's boarding pass was the same way she dismissed his existence. Passengers began to look over, whispering, some with curious eyes, others with that familiar wordless judgment Andre knew too well. The man stepped back slightly, but continued to block the aisle, waiting for the result he had already decided would favor him. The lead flight attendant, Catherine Doyle, arrived. She listened to Lindsay's explanation, and like her subordinate, she addressed the man first. When Andre tried to speak, Catherine raised her hand to silence him, her voice firm, but layered with implication. "Sir, please cooperate. Let us handle this." Handle. As if he was the problem. As if his presence in first class was something that needed to be evaluated. 2 more flight attendants appeared behind her, forming an invisible wall that boxed him in, forcing him into a position where he had no choice but to stand still and listen. Eventually, Captain Mark Dalton stepped out of the cockpit, wearing the weary look of someone who wanted the issue resolved quickly. Truth be damned. Catherine relayed the story, and in the way she told it, Andre was the one causing disruption, while the white man was the inconvenienced passenger. Andre raised his boarding pass once more. "I'm asking for a system check. I am entitled to this seat." The captain glanced briefly at the screen, then shook his head. "We need to depart on time. If you continue to disrupt the boarding process, I will have to ask you to leave the aircraft." A short sentence, but heavy with authority. Authority granted by the uniform. Authority that often pushed men like Andre to the outer edges whenever they demanded fairness. Andre looked around. 4 white faces surrounding him. Dozens of others watching from the rows behind. He thought of his unfinished presentation, the multi-$100 million meeting awaiting him, and his father's words, "Choose the right battles if you want to win the real war." Not one of them looked at him as a first-class passenger. Not one saw him as a CEO leading a billion-dollar corporation. Not one saw him as someone deserving. They only saw a black man who was refusing to cooperate. In that instant, Andre felt clearly the reality he had lived with his entire life. His true power existed outside this aircraft, but in here, trapped between metal walls and these people, he was at a disadvantage. He tightened his grip on his briefcase, swallowing the humiliation. "Fine. I'll move." Lindsay gave a small, satisfied smile, and Catherine exhaled with relief, as if they had finally resolved the trouble. They guided him back through the cabin, past the staring eyes, the smirks, the subtle or intentional disdain. As Andre stepped away from seat 1, none of them realized they had just humiliated not only a passenger, but someone capable of reshaping the entire trajectory of their airline with a single decision. None of them knew that every step he took toward row 34 was a countdown to the storm they were about to face. And what they certainly did not know was this: the man they had dismissed was the one who held the real power, the one who could cost them far more than a seat, the one who could make their entire sky collapse in an instant. Andre walked into the premium cabin, only to be pushed farther back where the warm golden glow of first class faded into the cold white lighting of economy. When Catherine stopped in front of row 34, her voice sounded flat and professional, but the blade hidden inside every word was sharp. "This is the only seat left. Sit here. We need to depart." A 3-seat row, the middle seat, and the 2 passengers on either side were already staring at him with irritation as if he were the reason the flight was delayed. Andre looked at the cramped space where his long legs would be wedged for 6 hours, then looked back at Catherine. There was no hint of remorse, no apology, only the pressure of authority, wrapped in a thin, icy layer of professionalism. He inhaled and stepped in, his knees immediately pressed against the seat in front. His shoulder brushed against the large man on the left, and the college student on the right shifted away as if his presence were an inconvenience. His Brioni suit began to wrinkle, and the tight space forced his shoulders inward, making him feel like an object jammed into a drawer that was never meant to hold him. He tried to push the negative thoughts away, but the weight of having his dignity stripped tightened around his chest. He pressed the call button. Another flight attendant, younger this time, walked over with an expression that clearly showed she didn't want to waste time on him. "I left my briefcase in first class," Andre said calmly. "It contains important work documents. I need it." She sighed as if he were asking for something beyond human capability. "I'll see what I can do. We are preparing for takeoff." Then she walked away without looking back, leaving Andre there with the feeling of being treated like an invisible burden. The captain's voice filled the cabin, the same man who had threatened to remove him from the plane moments earlier. "We are preparing for takeoff. Please take your seats." The sound of that voice made Andre's chest tighten. The humiliation still burned under his skin like a fresh wound. He closed his eyes, trying to steady himself, reminding his mind that this was only a moment. But deep inside, old memories surged back, all the times he had been underestimated, questioned, treated as someone who did not belong. As the plane began to taxi, he heard the whispers behind him. "Did you see that guy? The one they kicked out of first class?" "Yeah, he definitely didn't look like he belonged there." Quiet laughter followed, cutting like small blades. Andre opened his eyes and stared at the back of the seat in front of him, holding on to his calm with the disciplined control he had built his entire life. Then from the galley behind him, he heard the flight attendants' voices clearly. "Who does that black guy think he is sitting in first class? Probably used miles or got upgraded by accident. You can tell he's not actually business class. They are always overly confident." Soft laughter, small but sharp. Sharp enough for Andre to feel each word slicing into his pride. He did not turn around. He did not react. But every word landed in his memory like drops of acid. These people had not only taken his seat, they had taken the way they chose to see him, viewing him as an object out of place, as someone who could never truly deserve the front of the plane, no matter who he was, what he had achieved, or the life-saving deal he was flying to secure. A small sound came from his right. The young woman in the aisle seat who had been wearing headphones suddenly removed them. Andre glanced over and saw an expression he did not expect: outrage. Not pity. Not curiosity. Outrage. She looked toward the galley eyes, narrowing slightly, as if trying to confirm what she had just heard. When their eyes met, Andre sensed something unusual. She understood. The recognition startled him enough that he had to look away to hide the flicker of emotion in his gaze. The plane leveled in the air. The seatbelt sign switched off. The man on Andre's left immediately reclined his seat as far back as possible, crushing what little space Andre had. Andre reached for his tablet, but the cramped seat turned the motion into a struggle. When he finally pulled it out, he saw the battery at 30%, and there was no power outlet in economy. A hospital room flashed through his mind. A patient. A doctor missing a diagnosis. A Vertex algorithm that could save that life if this deal succeeded. Andre felt the urgency, the fear, the helplessness. He needed to prepare. He needed space. He needed respect. But what he received instead was a middle seat that trapped him in discomfort and contempt. The chime for the drink cart sounded from the front. Andre looked toward first class, where the man sitting in his rightful seat was being served wine with a pampering smile. The image felt like another blade slicing through the patience Andre had spent years holding together. He lowered his head, fingers interlocked. A slow breath left his chest. No one saw the storm curling inside him. No one understood that the injustice they had just inflicted was not confined to seat 34B. It would become a spark. It would be the beginning of a storm none of them could imagine. And what they understood even less was this: the young woman who had just removed her headphones was about to change the entire game. When the cabin lights dimmed to signal the mid-flight rest period, the cramped space around Andre felt as if it were shrinking even further. The steady breathing of nearby passengers, the mix of movie audio and music leaking from headphones, all blended into a thick layer of noise that made it even harder for his mind to focus. He tried to adjust his posture, but the middle seat allowed no comfortable movement. His left shoulder was still pressed against the man beside him, and his right arm stayed pulled inward to avoid brushing against the young woman on his other side. The mix of food smells cheap perfume, and the stale scent of an aging aircraft made it harder to breathe. But just then, as he was sinking into that exhaustion and discomfort, the girl across the aisle, the one who had taken off her headphones earlier, suddenly stood up and walked toward the galley. Each step she took seemed to pull a new current of air through the cabin. Andre watched her for a brief second, then forced himself to look back at his tablet, even though he knew there was little he could do with the remaining battery. But only a few minutes later, when she returned, something he never expected happened. As she passed his row, she paused, subtly leaned down, and placed a business card gently onto his hand. No explanation, no pity, no lingering stare, just a small nod. The gesture was so discreet that anyone not paying close attention would have assumed she merely adjusted her jacket. Andre looked at the card lying face down, noticing only the embossed lettering on the back, Horizon Atlantic Airlines. His heart tightened slightly, as if instinct warned him that he had just been handed a key piece of the entire puzzle. When the plane trembled lightly through turbulence, Andre turned the card over. Her name, Hannah Cooper, title Assistant Director, Customer Experience at Horizon Atlantic's headquarters. On the back in neat handwriting, meet me in the rear galley in 10 minutes. Do not let anyone see. In that moment, for the first time during the entire flight, something flickered inside Andre's chest hope. A small hope, fragile, but real, like a sliver of light slipping through a darkened doorway. He stayed still, waiting for the cabin lights to stabilize, then rose carefully, making sure not to bump passengers who slept or leaned over their screens. As he stood, he sensed the same curious eyes watching him, the ones that had followed him earlier when he was forced out of first class. But this time, he did not let them touch him. He walked straight toward the back of the plane. The rear galley was quiet, carrying the faint smell of coffee. The white cabin lights cast a sharp glow across Hannah's face, making her look both composed and tense. When she saw Andre, she gave a small nod like someone who had already prepared herself for what she was about to do. "Thank you for coming," she said softly, almost low enough that only the two of them could hear. Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes were sharp, clear, and resolute. Andre folded his arms, maintaining a calm exterior, even though questions swirled inside him. "You work for Horizon Atlantic?" "Yes," Hannah replied with a small nod, then glanced quickly toward the aisle to ensure no flight attendants were approaching. "I heard everything they said about you, and I also know exactly why you were removed from Seat 1A. Andre tilted his head, his eyes darkening with curiosity and caution. Hannah opened her employee app and turned the screen toward him. His name was listed clearly at the top, Mitchell Andre Seat 1, a verified priority booking, and just below, Harlan Gregory Seat 1. Be standard first class. She spoke quietly, tension running through every word. In the system seat, 1A belongs to you. There was no duplicate booking, no misunderstanding. Harlan was never assigned to that seat. A cold shiver traveled down Andre's spine, not only because of the insult he had endured, but because of the realization that the flight crew had known the truth from the beginning. That meant they had chosen to ignore it, chosen to believe a white man without checking, chosen to treat him as someone who could not possibly belong in first class. Hannah continued, her voice slow but steady. "I also heard Lindsay and Catherine talking. They didn't think you belonged in first class from the moment you boarded. They assumed you belonged in the back." Andre stayed silent for several seconds. Those words hit him like stones, but this time they didn't break him. They only fueled the fire he had been holding back. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. This was not something an ordinary employee would dare to do, especially on a flight operated by their own company. Hannah swallowed her eyes, turning slightly red. "My brother is married to a black woman. When I travel with them, I see the looks, the questions, the changes in service. I started noticing things I had never seen before. And what happened to you can't be ignored. It happens far too often in this company." In that moment, Andre saw the sincerity in every word she spoke, a rare understanding and a courage that deserved respect. "You should record every interaction from now until we land." Hannah said, her voice low but firm. "I will do my part, but your evidence will be what they cannot deny." Andre nodded slowly, the pressure he had been holding inside shifting into a sharp, focused energy. No longer humiliation, no longer helplessness, but clarity, strategy, and the resolve of a man who had stood in many high-stakes battles. "Thank you," he said. "You have no idea how important this is." Hannah shook her head gently. "What matters is not who you are. What matters is that what they did to you is wrong." When Andre left the galley and walked back into the narrow aisle, his steps no longer felt heavy. He now understood that this battle had shifted direction entirely. What began as a private humiliation had just become a truth that would shake an entire airline. They thought they could push him out of seat 1A without consequences. They were about to learn they had pushed the wrong man. Andre returned to row 34 with a completely different state of mind. The sinking feeling was gone. The heavy helplessness in his chest had vanished. In its place was a cold clarity, the kind of sharp awareness a man has when he finally finds the missing piece needed to flip the entire game. He sat down, pulled out his phone, and opened the camera. His hand was so steady it surprised even him. This was no longer a reaction. This was strategy. Lindsay, the same flight attendant who had stood in front of him earlier, like a judge ready to deliver a sentence, was coming down the aisle with a tray of water. The moment she noticed Andre's phone angled slightly in her direction, her forced smile disappeared. She froze, then snapped sharply. "Sir, you're not allowed to record video on the flight." Andre looked up, his expression calm but sharp enough to cut. "The FAA permits electronic devices in airplane mode. I'm documenting my customer experience. I am not violating any regulation." Her body tensed, a flicker of fear passing across her face. She glanced around nervously, then said stiffly, "I'll have to inform the lead flight attendant." "You should," Andre replied, his voice low and decisive, "because I want to speak with him as well." Minutes later, Ronald Pierce approached, trying to maintain an authoritative expression, though irritation was clearly visible in his eyes. He positioned himself in the aisle, as if his uniform alone granted him the right to block Andre's air. "I've been told you're causing a disturbance and recording without permission." Andre tilted his head, camera still rolling, and spoke with an even, precise tone that made nearby passengers lift their heads to listen. "There is no disturbance. I asked a very simple question your team refused to address during boarding. Verify the manifest to determine who was assigned Seat 1A. They did not. They chose to believe one side." Ronald tightened his grip on the document folder he was holding. "The matter has been resolved by the captain. You should be reasonable and comply." A word slipped into the space between them, like a stone dropped into still water. Reasonable. A word Andre had heard all his life, a word used to remind him he should shrink, stay quiet, and never cross the lines society had drawn for him. But today, that word held no power at all. Andre gave a small, humorless laugh. "You call that resolved? I was removed from the seat I paid for, denied verification, treated differently, in full view of everyone here, and you call that resolution?" Ronald's voice lowered, but instead of softening it, shifted into threat. "You should be careful with your attitude." Another phrase, a familiar one. A phrase black people heard every time they dared to stand upright. "Did you just threaten me?" Andre asked, slowly, clearly, each word piercing the air. Ronald stumbled. I want to see the manifest," Andre cut in. "Right now." Realizing he could not keep dodging with passengers beginning to pay attention, Ronald pulled out his tablet. He attempted to angle the screen away, but Andre spoke quickly, sharply. "Turn it toward me, or I will consider this a refusal to provide information." Ronald froze, then reluctantly rotated the tablet. His eyes darted across the list, and in that instant, Andre saw something new flash across his face. Real fear. Ronald's lips twitched, trying to hide it. But he could not hide the words clearly displayed. 1A Mitchell, Andre, confirmed. 1B, Harlan, Gregory, confirmed. No double booking. No mistake. No system error. Only one truth laid bare. Andre had been removed from his own seat because of prejudice and disregard. Ronald inhaled slowly, trying to sound unaffected. "Well, it appears I was right from the beginning," Andre finished for him, his voice quiet but heavy as a hammer. At that moment, a man in the row behind spoke up. "I heard everything. They didn't even check your info earlier." A woman beside him nodded. "They took one look at you and made their decision." A ripple spread. The whispers no longer defended the crew. They questioned them. Ronald swallowed hard. "You can file a complaint after the flight." "I absolutely will," Andre said, "along with complete evidence of how you and your team treated me." When Ronald turned and walked away, his steps were so fast they bordered on a retreat. Andre leaned back in his seat and drew a deep breath. In that moment, he was no longer the man who had been pushed to row 34. He was the man quietly rewriting the entire trajectory of this flight. When he glanced across the aisle, Hannah was watching silently. She said nothing, but her eyes held solid agreement, as if both of them had just confirmed the same truth. The battle was no longer confined to first class. The battle was unfolding across the entire sky. Andre opened his phone and sent a rapid series of messages to his legal team, PR department, and executive advisors. Not many words, but the final line was enough to make all of them understand that the storm had officially begun. Prepare the response plan. We're taking this all the way. They did not know that the moment Andre stepped out of seat 1A was the exact moment he decided he would not retreat another inch. And he had no idea that in just a few hours, the entire Horizon Atlantic organization would be forced to kneel before the truth they had tried to ignore. Andre sat in the narrow row, but his mind was no longer confined to that cramped space. Once the truth had been exposed through the manifest, his patience turned into a quiet, razor-sharp strength. He knew the rules of the game had changed, power had shifted, and the people who thought they could push him down had no idea they were now the ones being watched. The cabin lights brightened again as the crew prepared for the next service round. Andre kept his camera recording openly, without hiding, without hesitation. He no longer needed to shrink himself to fit the rules set by people who had shown him no respect. Every expression, every tone of voice, every choice they made was now evidence. Lindsay returned to the economy cabin, pushing the beverage cart with a tense urgency that any observant passenger could recognize as a sign something was wrong. When her eyes flicked toward Andre's phone, her face tightened like a pulled string. But this time, she did not dare raise her voice. She did not dare scold. She did not dare mention any regulations. She simply pushed the cart faster, as if keeping distance from him was her last safeguard for her career. Andre watched her go, his gaze no longer heavy with hurt, but calm with the certainty of someone who already knew how this would end. They may have won a tiny moment when they pushed him out of first class, but he understood the real battle was never inside the plane. It was in the world where his voice, his influence, and his power reached far beyond anything they could imagine. The heavy-set man beside him had woken up. He glanced over with a guilty expression. I heard everything. They were wrong. Andre nodded. Not because he needed the validation, but because the truth no longer lived in personal feelings. It had become a current with momentum no one could stop. A moment later, footsteps sounded from the front. Catherine, the lead flight attendant, made her way back to the rear cabin. Her normally stern face now carried tension, the look of someone struggling to hold on to authority slipping out of their grasp. She stopped beside Andre, standing just at the edge of his aisle seat, trying to keep her tone professional, though her voice had changed. There was no longer the sharpness of someone who believed she had the right to command, only the shaky defensiveness of someone who realized she had chosen the wrong person to mistreat. Sir, I've been told you are still recording. Andre did not let her finish. He turned the screen slightly toward her, letting her see the minutes already captured. I have every right to do so, he said, his voice low but clear. And I'm recording how your team has treated me from the moment I boarded. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. A heavy silence settled over them. In her eyes, Andre saw late regret, not regret for mistreating him, but regret for choosing the wrong man to mistreat. You can file a complaint, I know, Andre cut in, his voice sharp as ice. I have already sent everything to my company's legal and communications divisions. They are monitoring this flight in real time. Catherine's face drained of color. Your company? Yes, Andre replied slowly. Vertex Health Tech. I'm the CEO. Catherine froze for several seconds. Her eyes widened. Her breath stuttered. It was as if she had just heard a verdict handed down directly in front of her. Passengers around them began whispering. Andre had not raised his voice, had not boasted. He had simply spoken the truth. And that truth stripped every mask off the entire flight crew. A truth that, had they known from the beginning, would have stopped them from ever treating him as an undeserving passenger. Catherine struggled to regain her voice. Sir Iwi, is there anything we can do for you now? A question that arrived far too late. Andre looked straight into her eyes. There was no anger, no hostility. Only the calm of someone standing far above the situation without needing to say so. I want only one thing, Andre said. Continue doing your job, and do not try to hide anything. The truth will take flight on its own. Catherine understood. Not because Andre threatened her, but because the quiet authority in his tone made her realize something the real fear had never been about him recording. The real fear was about who he was. As she walked away, her steps were heavy, dragging behind them the collapse of the polished facade she had worn throughout the flight. Andre watched without emotion. Sometimes, silence was the loudest verdict. Across the aisle, Hannah leaned slightly toward him, close enough for him to hear, but not anyone else. Just one more piece, she whispered. You'll see. Andre gave a small nod, as if he already knew exactly what was coming. A sharp instinct settled in his chest. This flight would not end like any other. Not for him. Not for them. And certainly not for Horizon Atlantic. Andre settled back into his seat, and the cabin felt compressed around him, not because of the tight space, but because the atmosphere had shifted into something entirely different. The kind of atmosphere that forms when people are panicking while trying hard to look normal. From the middle seat of row 34, he noticed every subtle movement that would slip past anyone else, but not a man who had spent his life reading people. Lindsay was moving faster than usual, avoiding eye contact. Catherine checked her phone repeatedly, glancing toward the back as if afraid Andre might stand up and expose everything at any moment. Ronald had lost all trace of confidence, his face tense as he walked past each row. They had no idea Andre was recording. No idea Hannah was on his side. No idea their own system had already confirmed he was right from the beginning. But they knew one thing: control was no longer in their hands. Andre opened his notes app, tapping out a few quick lines to his legal and executive teams. Each word felt like laying another brick in the strategy he was assembling, calm, precise, and entirely lawful. He did not need to raise his voice or escalate. He only needed to wait. Because justice, in the eyes of a CEO who understood systems, was not fiery or impulsive. It was a process, and once enough evidence stacked into place, entire structures could collapse on their own. Suddenly, the young woman on his right spoke up, her voice hesitant. "I'm sorry for what they did to you." Andre turned a little surprised. She lowered her gaze, her cheeks flushed. "I don't know what to say. But it wasn't right. I just wanted you to know." Andre gave her a slight nod. "Thank you." Not everyone has the courage to say that out loud. She offered a small, relieved smile before turning away, and Andre could see the tension in her shoulders ease. as if she too needed to release the weight of the injustice she had witnessed. After a while, the engine eased into a smoother hum, signaling the plane was entering a steady phase. The cabin lights softened, and many passengers began to nod off. But Andre could not. In his mind, every link in the chain of events was falling into place. Clear discrimination, refusal to verify information threats toward a passenger, and now the quiet panic rippling through the crew. A strange silence settled over the rear cabin when Lindsay returned. She looked toward Andre for barely a second, and in that moment he saw fear. Not fear of him, but fear of what he could do. Then Hannah stood up, walked briefly toward the front, and returned just as quickly, stopping beside Andre's row. She bent down, pretending to look for something in her bag, but her whisper was razor thin. "I just got an internal update." Andre angled his head slightly. "What update? They reported you to headquarters for recording and being non-compliant. Looks like they're trying to build a story to protect themselves." Andre gave a faint smile, neither angry nor surprised. "I expected that." Hannah leaned in closer, her voice barely audible. "But headquarters reviewed the seat data. They know you were right. And someone from the Bay Area office is waiting at the gate when we land." Andre looked straight into her eyes. They held nothing but conviction. He understood immediately the balance of power was no longer tipping, it had already shifted. "Thank you," he said, quietly. "You don't need to thank me," Hannah replied. "I'm just doing what they should have done." She returned to her seat, but Andre's heartbeat changed. Not from worry, from certainty. Everything was aligning. The evidence was solid. There were witnesses, and the airline had unknowingly boxed itself into a corner. About 30 minutes later, as the plane shook gently to begin its descent, the captain's voice came through the speakers. His tone was tighter than before, with a slight quiver at the end he failed to hide. Andre caught it instantly. "Please remain seated after the aircraft comes to a full stop. We have to complete a special procedure before allowing passengers to disembark." A special procedure. No airline used that phrase unless something serious was unfolding. Passengers murmured anxiously. Some looked around in confusion. Lindsay and Catherine stood rigidly at the front and rear of the cabin, their faces pulled tight. Ronald no longer walked with the confidence he had earlier. He stood awkwardly near the galley door, gripping his tablet with both hands, eyes fixed on the floor. Every cell in Andre's body recognized what was coming. This was no longer intuition. It was certainty. The plane touched down, jolted softly, then braked to a steady stop. No one unbuckled their seatbelt. No one stood. The silence in the cabin was thin and fragile, like a sheet of ice waiting for the slightest crack. The cabin door opened. Not for baggage handlers, not for ground staff, but for two men in black suits, walking with firm, unhurried steps, faces expressionless. Horizon Atlantic Security. They did not look around. They did not hesitate. They headed straight toward first class. Andre did not need to see to know exactly what was happening. The entire aircraft held its breath. Then a clear voice echoed from the front, sharp enough to cut through every row, all the way to 34. "Mr. Gregory Harlan, please, stand and follow us." The words fell through the cabin like a lightning strike. Hannah tilted her head toward Andre, her eyes saying what her voice did not. "It has begun." Andre straightened his back, his breath steady. The storm horizon Atlantic, never prepared for, had officially touched down. Andre remained still, his body unmoving like stone, but his mind blazing bright like a torch newly set aflame. From row 34, he did not need to see clearly to understand exactly what was happening up front. Gregory Harlan, the man who had pointed at his face and called him someone sitting in the wrong seat, was now being escorted out of first class with the very tone he himself had used to belittle others. His loud protests, "I didn't do anything wrong. You're making a mistake. I paid for that seat," rang sharp and desperate, but no one believed him anymore. No one was on his side. The sound traveled down the cabin to Andre like a warped melody, harsh, yet strangely satisfying. Not because Andre wanted him humiliated, but because the truth had finally been dragged into the light, exactly as it should be, without excuses, without distortion. As Gregory was led down the aisle, head bowed in shame, face-flushed red passengers watched in stunned silence. Some whispered, "So he was the one who took someone else's seat. Serves him right." Andre remained still, showing no triumphant expression. He did not need to smile. He did not need to say a word. Justice did not always roar. Sometimes it simply changed the color of the entire space. Then footsteps echoed lightly, but with purpose, from the aircraft door. A woman in a dark suit stepped inside her posture, straight her eyes, sharp yet composed, carrying the presence of someone with genuine authority. Passengers murmured, "Who is she?" "She doesn't look like a lead attendant. Must be someone high up." She walked directly toward the center of the cabin, her gaze sweeping over everything, like someone who already knew exactly what had unfolded. No one had to introduce her. She was the person Horizon Atlantic called when things spiraled beyond control, Linda Chavez, Vice President of Operations. Linda entered the economy cabin and stopped in front of row 34, where Andre sat upright. Without a moment of hesitation, she leaned slightly toward him, a gesture of respect none of the attendants had shown him at any point during the flight. "Are you Andre Mitchell?" Andre nodded, his expression steady and composed. "On behalf of Horizon Atlantic, I want to offer a sincere apology for what happened on this flight." The cabin tightened like a pulled wire. Several passengers held their breath. A vice president of an airline apologizing to a passenger in row 34. It was so rare, it might as well have never happened. Linda continued, "Your luggage and briefcase have been retrieved for you. We would like to escort you off the aircraft first, so we can address the matter immediately." A heavy silence fell over the cabin. All eyes turned to Andre, the man who hours earlier had been treated as someone who did not belong in first class. Now he was the only passenger being escorted by senior leadership. Andre rose slowly, not rushing, not gloating. He smoothed his vest, touched the back of the seat in front of him, as if closing the first chapter of a much larger story. What he felt was not glee, but certainty he had endured exactly as much as he needed to. He had been patient long enough, and now justice had begun moving toward him. As Andre stepped into the aisle, the surrounding passengers fell silent. Some looked away, ashamed of their earlier silence. Others watched with quiet respect. From across the aisle, Hannah gave him a subtle nod, as someone who had witnessed every moment from the fall to the rise. Walking through first class, Andre saw Gregory standing with the security officers. His face was twisted with anger, but when his eyes met Andre's, they froze. Recognition dawned too late that he had chosen the wrong man to disrespect. Andre paused for half a second, offering nothing but a level, calm look. Not revenge, not malice. Just the truth, real power had never been in seat 1A. It had always been in the person who sat there. Linda escorted Andre off the plane and down the jet bridge, where the airport lighting cast a pale glow across his face. Waiting at the end was a group of people, in suits, employees from the airline's headquarters. One of the men bowed his head slightly to greet Andre, not as a problematic passenger, but as someone of importance. Through the glass, the San Francisco sky was gray, but inside Andre, a different kind of light was rising, the light of a storm that had formed in silence and was now heading straight toward the heart of a broken system. Linda spoke quietly, just for the two of them. "Our CIO would like to meet with you immediately," Andre replied in a voice calm and sharp, like a finely honed blade. "I want to meet him as well." Then he stepped forward, long, confident strides, leaving behind an aircraft full of people who had just witnessed the moment the wind shifted unaware that a much larger storm awaited them beyond the gate. Andre followed Linda through the passageway, leading into Horizon Atlantic's private operations wing, like a man stepping into an arena he had prepared for. Long before, even though the battle had begun only a few hours earlier. The carpet beneath their feet was thick, the white lighting smooth across his face, but none of it softened the tension hanging heavily in the air around them. Linda's steps were brisk but controlled, as though she were escorting a key witness in a case whose gravity she fully understood. As they turned into the VIP lounge, Andre saw Maya, his executive assistant, waiting with a worried expression. The moment she spotted him, she hurried forward. "Thank God you're okay," she breathed out, then lowered her voice. "The video you sent, it's spreading fast. The press is already calling non-stop." Andre gave a slight nod. He did not need to explain anything. From the fragments he had sent, Maya had already pieced together the rest. That was why she was the person he trusted most at Vertex Health Tech. Linda added her voice, heavy. "Our CEO, Mr. Harold Kent, is waiting for you at the Bay Area headquarters. The car is ready outside." Andre looked directly at her for a moment, not with hatred or anger, but with the steady gaze of a man who knew exactly where his power stood. "Good," he said. "I want this resolved today." They exited through a private gate, avoiding the growing crowd of curious passengers gathering in the terminal. A sleek, black sedan waited the driver opening the door with a respectful bow. Andre and Maya got in. When the car door closed, the sudden quiet seemed to compress the space, leaving only the sound of two steady heartbeats under a thick layer of anticipation. Maya leaned toward him. "Are you prepared for this? It's bigger than a standard complaint." Andre inhaled slowly, eyes fixed ahead. "Maya, what they did wasn't just an insult to me. It represents something bigger. If I stay silent, I'd be betraying every person who stood exactly where I stood today, but had no voice." Maya nodded. She understood the deepest truth about him. Justice was not a slogan to Andre. It was a principle. The car drove straight to Horizon Atlantic's Bay Area headquarters, the massive glass building rising like a fortress of corporate power. But today, that power was shaking. When Andre stepped out, dozens of eyes from nearby employees turned toward him, surprised, confused, even frightened. News had spread faster than any internal memo. Hannah appeared through the revolving door, no longer in uniform, but in a sharp business suit. She walked toward him with the confidence of someone who knew she stood on the right side of history. "Mr. Mitchell, I'll take you straight to the 18th floor. The CEO is meeting with legal and communications right now. Andre nodded. Thank you. Hannah spoke softly as they walked. Sometimes the truth just needs someone brave enough to drag it into the light. Today is that day. The elevator opened into a long hallway, silent enough that each step echoed. Employees stepped aside immediately when they saw Andre bowing slightly, as if he were a high-level auditor arriving to handle a crisis without knowing he was the storm's center. At the end of the hall outside, a large conference room, an anxious assistant hurried out. Mr. Harold Kent will see you now, but I should warn you he's not in a good mood. Andre did not smile, but a cool glint appeared in his eyes. Neither am I. The large doors opened, revealing a spacious conference room with wide glass windows overlooking the San Francisco Bay. Harold Kent, Horizon Atlantic's CEO, a silver-haired man with a normally commanding presence, stood with his back turned, as if trying to compose what little calm he had left. When he finally faced them, a stiff, cracking smile appeared on his lips like a mask about to split. Mr. Mitchell Harold began, his deep voice noticeably unsteady. I'd like to personally apologize for the incident on your flight. I'm not here to hear a pre-written apology, Andre replied, stepping into the room with the natural confidence of someone who did not need to assert it. I'm here to talk about the truth. And the consequences. Harold swallowed, forced to sit down, before Andre did a power signal that made several executives in the room exchange tense glances. Andre placed his phone on the table, projecting the video clip, the discriminatory remarks, the dismissive looks, the moment they pushed him out of seat 1A without checking anything. In that elegant glass-walled room, every word echoed like an undeniable accusation. Harold attempted to speak. We will review the matter thoroughly. Andre lifted his gaze, sharp as a blade. Not a matter, a system. And it starts with the fact that your team believed they had the authority to decide who belongs in first class. Silence dropped over the room like a verdict. Andre leaned back, his voice even but weighted with precision. Today you are not looking at an upset customer. You are looking at the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. And I will not let this be swept away, like the dozens of cases before it. Harold's face paled. He realized what the crew had failed to grasp earlier. The man they tried to belittle was someone who could drag the entire airline into the biggest crisis of the decade. Andre did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The calm strength in his tone was far more formidable. The real confrontation had only just begun. The air inside the conference room was so heavy, it felt as if a single breath could fracture the glass overlooking the San Francisco Bay. Harold Kent sat frozen in his large leather chair, his fingers interlocked so tightly the knuckles had turned white. Behind him stood Horizon Atlantic's senior executives, communications, legal operations, people used to giving orders, now sitting stiffly like students waiting for a surprise examination. Across from them sat Andre, shoulders relaxed, but eyes sharp as a perfectly honed blade. There was no trace of the man who once sat quietly in row 34. No trace of the man forced out of seat 1A with his gaze lowered. Only the calm power of someone who had stepped past the limits of silence and chosen to stand up at the exact moment the world expected him to stay quiet. Harold spoke first, his voice strained with effort. Mr. Mitchell, I believe we can resolve this matter in a civil, respectful way and avoid unnecessary damage to both sides. Andre did not answer right away. He looked straight at Harold, as if he were looking through the shell of a man who had lived too long inside the comfort of unchecked authority. Then he placed his phone on the table and swiped. The video replayed every moment the flight crew pushing him out of first class, the discriminatory tone, the dismissive behavior, the refusal to verify information. Each line that echoed through the elegant conference room landed like a slap across the faces seated there. No one dared lift their head to meet the truth reflected on the screen. When the video ended, Andre finally spoke. His voice was not loud, not heated, but its weight shrank the room. You speak of preventing damage. But do you even know where the real damage began? It began the moment your uniformed staff decided I did not belong in first class, that my skin color was reason enough to remove me from a seat I paid for and was fully confirmed in. And worse, they believed they could do it without consequences. Harold drew a heavy breath. We will take strict action. They will be suspended. And regarding you, Horizon Atlantic is willing to compensate. Andre raised a hand, stopping him as if swatting away something trivial. I do not want free flights. I do not want money. I do not want lifetime upgrades. I am not a child being pacified with candy. One executive beside Harold cleared his throat awkwardly, but the quick flicker in Andre's eyes silenced him instantly. Andre continued, his tone lower yet sharper. I am not here for myself. If it were only about me, I might have let it go long ago. But how many black passengers had no voice, no evidence, no power to defend themselves? How many were pushed to row 34 with no one watching? How many times has this system swallowed the truth because people like you wanted to protect your image? Harold stammered. I understand what you mean. You do not, Andre replied immediately, his gaze locking onto Harold's. If you understood, this would never have happened. Silence filled the room again, deeper and heavier than before. Then Andre opened the leather briefcase beside him and pulled out a folder. He placed it in front of Harold, each page, crisp and deliberate, prepared in the car on the way here. This is my proposal, Andre said. And if you refuse, I have enough evidence, enough data, and enough influence to ensure your board of directors must answer to the public within 24 hours. Harold glanced at the cover. He swallowed hard as he read the first line, Mandatory Reform Reconstruction of Anti-Discrimination Controls and Service Governance at Horizon Atlantic Airlines. Andre continued outlining each demand, not a single word wasted. One immediate termination of every crew member involved. No suspension, no review. 2, an independent audit of 5 years of discrimination, complaints with full public release. 3, mandatory intensive unconscious bias training for all employees. 4, the creation of an independent Air Travel Equality Council with full authority to intervene in internal processes. 5, a $50 million contribution to the Air Travel Equality Initiative to improve fairness in the aviation industry. The room fell silent. Then Harold burst out, voice cracking. $50 million. Do you realize how large that request is? It affects shareholders and the financial stability of the airline. Andre leaned back, eyes sharp enough to cut through steel. Oh, I know. But do you know what affects your airline more? A globally viral video. A billionaire CEO publicly exposing Horizon Atlantic's systemic discrimination. A boycott hashtag spreading across every major platform. And you think those losses are smaller than $50 million? Harold looked at him as though he could see the shadow of the next crisis hovering over the company. Then the inevitable happened. His phone buzzed repeatedly. When the screen lit up, the name stretched the tension in the room to the breaking point. Chairwoman Margaret Stone. Calling Harold looked at Andre before answering desperation in his eyes. "Yes, I'm with Mr. Mitchell. No, ma'am." "No, it wasn't my decision. Yes, I understand." When he ended the call, his face had gone pale, almost matching the fog outside the window. "The board," he said hoarsely. "They are ordering me to sign the approval for your entire proposal and temporarily resign while the investigation proceeds." Andre looked directly into his eyes. "And that is only the beginning. I did not come here today to reclaim Seat 1A. I came to reclaim respect." No one spoke after that. There was no need. Their stiff faces, lowered gazes, and trembling breath said everything. Andre rose. Maya followed. Hannah stood at the doorway, her eyes bright like someone who had finally witnessed the moment she always hoped someone brave enough would make real. As Andre stepped out of the conference room, he felt something unmistakable in his chest. Not satisfaction, not vengeance, but righteousness. Something long suppressed had finally been spoken. A system once thought untouchable had finally been forced to face its reflection. A voice that had been pushed down for years had finally risen to its rightful volume. Today, Andre did not just reclaim Seat 1A. He reclaimed something far more valuable, a change that thousands before him never had the chance to reach. From the perspective of a specialist in organizational culture and systemic influence, the journey of Andre Mitchell reveals an enduring truth. Real power does not lie in a first-class seat. It lies in the ability to stand up at the right moment and speak aloud what so many others have been forced to stay silent about. A small act of discrimination, if ignored, becomes structure, becomes habit, becomes a toxic culture that can swallow an entire organization. But when even one person is steadfast enough, calm enough, and courageous enough, the entire system is forced to change. What matters is not the fall of a flight crew or the removal of a CEO's title. What matters is how one person transformed humiliation into drive, turned pain into action, and reshaped a personal experience into a moment of awakening for an entire industry. That is the power of refusing to shrink under the weight of someone else's gaze. If this story resonates with you, press like to help spread a message of respect and fairness. Do not forget to subscribe to follow more journeys where truth is brought into the light and dignity is always placed at the forefront. And before you leave the video, comment these 3 words: keep your dignity.